It was a quiet daytime afternoon at a small roadside diner. Sunlight poured through the wide front windows and reflected off chrome tables. The air smelled of coffee and fresh fries. Soft music played in the background. Everything felt normal and calm. At a corner booth, a deaf girl sat alone. She looked no older than 17. Her backpack rested beside her feet. Her hands moved gently as she read from her phone. She smiled to herself while waiting for her food. She came here often. It was one of the few places where she felt safe. The staff knew her face. They knew her gestures. She liked the quiet routine of daytime hours. That peace did not last long. The diner door opened with loud laughter. A group of young bullies walked in. They were full of noise and confidence. They spoke too loudly. They pushed past other customers. They noticed her immediately. One of them pointed at her hands. Another laughed and copied her movements. They surrounded her booth, blocking the light. Their voices grew sharper and crueler. She did not hear them, but she saw their faces. She saw their mouths twisting with mockery. She felt the table shake as one of them kicked it. The girl froze. Her smile disappeared. She lowered her eyes. She tried to ignore them. One bully waved a hand inches from her face. Another exaggerated fake sounds. They laughed harder when she did not react. Other customers noticed. Some looked away. Some pretended not to see. No one stood up. The girl gripped her napkin tightly. Her shoulders tensed. She was used to this pain. She had learned silence early in life. Then the diner door opened again. This time there was no laughter. No noise. Just a heavy calm. A tall man stepped inside. He moved slowly and confidently. He scanned the room without speaking. Steven Seagal had entered the diner. The bullies did not notice him yet. They were too busy laughing. Too busy feeling powerful. They had no idea. The moment they chose cruelty. The moment they mocked the silent. Their worst mistake had just walked through the door. Sunlight filled the diner through the wide glass windows. It was still daytime and the lunch rush had slowed down. Plates clinked softly as waitresses moved between tables. Coffee cups steamed on counters. Low conversations blended with the hum of the air conditioner. The deaf girl sat upright in her booth. She watched the waitress approach. Her hands moved with care and confidence. She used sign language to place her order. Her expressions were polite and clear. She had done this many times before. The waitress understood her well. She nodded and smiled. The interaction was calm and respectful. But from behind her the bullies watched closely. One of them leaned forward. He smirked as he copied her hand movements poorly. Another exaggerated the signs, twisting his fingers into nonsense. They laughed loudly at their own jokes. Their laughter cut through the diner. The girl noticed. She paused mid-sign. Her hands slowly lowered to her lap. Her eyes filled with confusion and hurt. She looked around the room. She hoped someone would say something. She hoped someone would help. No one did. A man at the counter stared at his phone. A couple near the window looked away. The waitress hesitated, unsure of what to do. The bullies grew bolder. One slammed his palm on the table. Another waved his hands mockingly inches from her face. They laughed harder when she flinched. The girl stayed silent. Not because she wanted to. Because silence was forced on her. She folded her hands tightly together. She stared down at the table. She tried to disappear. The diner kept moving around her. Food arrived at other tables. Cash registers opened and closed. Life went on as if nothing was wrong. Then the door opened. The bell above the door rang softly. Steven Seagal walked in. He did not rush. He did not announce himself. He took a slow step inside and stopped. His eyes scanned the diner. Years of discipline showed in his posture. His calm felt heavy and grounded. He noticed the tension instantly. He saw the girl sitting rigid and small. He saw the bullies standing too close. He saw their mocking gestures. His jaw tightened slightly. Steven walked toward the counter. He said nothing. He ordered nothing yet. He positioned himself where he could see clearly. The bullies continued laughing unaware. They felt safe in numbers. They felt untouchable. The girl slowly lifted her eyes. She noticed Steven watching. She did not know who he was, but she felt something shift. For the first time since they arrived, she did not feel completely alone. Steven remained silent. He observed every movement, every smirk, every cruel gesture. He waited, because he knew moments like this required timing. Not anger, not shouting, just presence. The diner atmosphere began to change. Some customers noticed him now. Whispers started spreading. The bullies still laughed, still mocked, still crossed lines. They had no idea. Someone had finally seen everything. Backhand index pointing right, comment where you are watching from. Backhand index pointing right and like if you believe bullying should never be ignored. One of the bullies reached across the table and knocked her drink over on purpose. The glass tipped slowly, then crashed onto the floor. Liquid spread across the table and soaked her sleeve. The diner went quiet for a moment. Another bully leaned closer and mocked her voice. He opened his mouth wide, making cruel fake sounds. He laughed knowing she could not hear him. The girl flinched. Her shoulders tightened. She stared at the wet table. She lowered her head, trying to stay strong. Her hands trembled slightly as she wiped the spill. She did not cry. She refused to give them that satisfaction. The bullies laughed louder. They felt powerful. They felt untouchable. That was when Steven slowly stood up. His chair scraped softly against the floor. The sound cut through the noise. Some heads turned. Steven took one step forward. Then another. He walked toward the table. With every step the atmosphere shifted. The air felt heavier. The laughter felt thinner. He stopped beside the girl. He did not raise his voice. He did not show anger. He simply stood there calm and steady. His presence alone demanded attention. The bullies looked up. One smirked. Another laughed nervously. Steven spoke quietly. His tone was even and controlled. "Pick it up and apologize." The words were simple, but they landed with weight. For a second there was silence. Then the bullies laughed. One of them leaned back in his chair. He scoffed as if amused. "Who are you supposed to be? This is none of your business." Another bully clapped sarcastically. "Hero of the day, huh?" They laughed again, louder than before. The girl remained still. She sensed something serious was happening. She looked up at Steven, unsure. Steven did not move. He did not repeat himself. He looked at each bully slowly, one by one. His eyes were calm, but they carried authority. The laughter began to fade. One bully shifted uncomfortably. Another avoided eye contact. Steven leaned slightly closer. His voice remained low. "I said pick it up." The room felt frozen. Other customers were watching now. No one spoke. The bullies tried to regain control. One of them stood up. He puffed his chest out. "You gonna make us?" Steven did not react. He simply stood there. The silence stretched. The girl watched his hands. They were relaxed, not clenched. She felt something new. Safety. The bully laughed again. But this time it sounded forced. He kicked the fallen glass aside. "Relax, old man." Steven straightened slightly. The tension thickened. Everyone sensed it. This was no longer about jokes. This was about respect. The bullies had crossed a line, and they were standing in front of someone who would not step aside. They laughed one last time. They had no idea. The next moments would change everything. Steven slowly shifted his attention away from the bullies. He turned slightly toward the girl. His movements were careful and deliberate. Then he raised his hands. He used simple hand signs. Clear movements. Gentle pace. The girl's eyes widened instantly. She leaned forward, unable to believe what she was seeing. He was speaking directly to her. In her language. Her breathing changed. Her hands lifted slowly in response. She signed back hesitantly at first. You are safe. I am here. Steven nodded. The diner felt completely still. The girl's face softened. The fear in her eyes eased. For the first time since the bullies arrived, she felt seen. She signed again. They are making fun of me. Steven's jaw tightened slightly. Not in anger. In resolve. He signed one more sentence. This stops now. The bullies stared in confusion. They did not understand the words. But they understood the shift. Something had changed. They were no longer in control. One of them laughed weakly. What is he doing? Another frowned. Is he talking to her? Steven slowly turned back toward them. His body faced them fully now. His shoulders squared. The calm remained. But it felt heavier. The bullies froze. They suddenly felt small. Not because he shouted. Not because he threatened. Because he stood without fear. Steven looked at them one by one. He did not rush. He did not blink. The silence stretched. His voice was calm but final. This ends now. The words were quiet. But they carried authority. The diner seemed to exhale. One bully swallowed hard. Another shifted his weight back. They glanced around, realizing everyone was watching. Steven took one step closer. No aggression. No rush. Just presence. You will apologize. You will leave. His voice never rose. The girl watched closely. Her hands hovered near her chest. She felt protected. The bullies tried to laugh again. But the sound would not come. Their confidence had vanished. One muttered under his breath. Another avoided Steven's eyes. Steven did not repeat himself. He waited. The tension pressed down on the table. On the floor. On every person in the diner. A waitress stood frozen holding a tray. A customer slowly lowered his phone. The bullies realized something terrifying. This man was not performing. He was not trying to impress anyone. He meant every word. Steven glanced briefly at the girl again. He gave her a small nod. She nodded back. She trusted him. Steven returned his gaze to the bullies. This ends now. This time no one laughed. The bullies felt exposed. Seen for who they were. And they understood. The moment they chose cruelty, they lost all power. The silence was broken by hurried footsteps. The diner manager rushed out from behind the counter. His face had gone pale. His eyes were locked on Steven. He stopped abruptly a few steps away. His voice trembled. Mr. Seagal. The name traveled fast. Whispers spread across the room like a wave. People leaned toward each other. Heads turned. Murmurs grew louder. That is Steven Seagal. No way. Is that really him? Phones slowly came out. Screens lit up. Hands began recording. The bullies noticed the change immediately. They looked around confused. Their smiles faded. Their bodies stiffened. One of them frowned. Who is that? Another's eyes widened. Wait. Recognition hit them one by one. The confidence drained from their faces. The jokes died on their lips. They finally understood who they were facing. Not just a stranger. Not just an older man. Steven Seagal. The man known for discipline. The man known for control. The man known for consequences. The manager swallowed hard. I am so sorry, sir. I did not see what was happening. Steven raised one hand gently. He did not look away from the bullies. The girl watched everything. She noticed the way people now stood taller. The way the bullies shrank back. One of them took a step away from the table. Another tried to laugh but failed. Steven spoke calmly. Everyone saw what they did. His voice carried across the diner. They mocked someone who could not hear them. They spilled her drink. They refused to stop. No one disagreed. The manager nodded quickly. Yes, sir. The bullies felt the weight of every stare. They were no longer in control of the room. One whispered, "Man, we should go." Another shook his head. "Just stay quiet." Steven turned slightly toward the girl. He signed a few reassuring words. She nodded slowly. The manager stepped closer. "Do you want me to call the police?" The word police made the bullies flinch. One of them spoke quickly. "We were just joking. It was nothing serious." Steven looked at him calmly. Bullying is never a joke. The room remained silent. Steven let the moment stretch. He allowed the truth to settle. He knew something important. This was not just about punishment. It was about accountability. The bullies stood exposed, surrounded by witnesses, unable to hide behind laughter. Steven folded his arms slowly. The girl watched him closely. She trusted his judgment. The entire diner waited. Backhand index pointing right. Should Steven teach them a lesson or call the police? Backhand index pointing right. Comment, teach or report. The tension finally broke. One of the bullies took a step back. Then another followed. Their shoulders slumped. Their voices dropped. "We are sorry." The words came out rushed and uneven. Not proud. Not confident. They avoided eye contact. Steven did not move closer. He did not raise his voice. He simply waited. The bullies apologized again. This time more quietly. "I did not mean it. We went too far." Steven listened without interrupting. Then he turned toward the girl. He knelt slightly so he was at her level. His movements were slow and respectful. He picked up a napkin. He helped wipe the spilled drink from the table. The girl watched his hands carefully. Steven signed one simple message. "You are not weak." Her eyes filled with tears. Not of fear. Of relief. She signed back slowly. "Thank you." Steven nodded gently. The diner began to react. At first it was just one clap. Then another. Soon the entire diner applauded. Not loudly. Not wildly. But with meaning. The sound filled the room. It washed over the girl. She straightened her posture. Her hands stopped trembling. The bullies stood frozen. They had nothing to say. They turned and walked toward the door. Their heads were down. Their laughter was gone. They left in shame. The door closed behind them. The diner felt lighter. The manager exhaled deeply. Staff returned to their places. Customers lowered their phones. Steven stood up calmly. He helped the girl adjust her chair. He made sure she was comfortable. The waitress returned quietly. She offered a fresh drink. The girl smiled politely. Steven signed one more time. "Never believe them." She nodded. The applause slowly faded. But the message remained. Steven walked back to his seat. He did not seek attention. He did not wait for praise. He sat quietly. The girl finished her meal in peace. For the first time that afternoon, the diner felt safe again. The lesson had been delivered. Not with force. Not with anger. But with dignity. The bullies left with shame. The girl stayed with strength. And everyone inside that diner learned what real power looks like. Bullying says nothing about the victim. It reveals everything about the bully. Cruelty is often loud. It hides behind laughter. It feeds on silence. But silence does not mean weakness. The girl in the diner did nothing wrong. She asked for a meal. She sat quietly. She respected everyone around her. The bullies chose mockery. They chose power without responsibility. They chose to feel strong by making someone feel small. That choice defined them. Real strength does not need an audience. It does not shout. It does not humiliate. Real strength notices the quiet ones. It steps in when others look away. Steven did not raise his voice. He did not threaten. He did not seek attention. He stood. He stayed calm. He protected someone who could not fight back. That is courage. Courage is not about size or fame. It is about action at the right moment. Every diner has a story like this. Every school. Every workplace. Someone is watching. Someone is waiting. Someone hopes another person will care enough to step in. Bullying survives on silence. It grows when good people say nothing. The moment someone stands up, It loses its power. The bullies left in shame. But the lesson stayed. The girl walked out with her dignity intact. She was not weak. She never was. Strength looks different than we expect. Sometimes it is quiet. Sometimes it uses hands instead of words. Sometimes it simply says, "You are not alone." If this story made you pause, if it reminded you of someone you know, then let it travel further. Stories like this matter. They change minds. They change behavior. Backhand index pointing right. Type respect if you stand against bullying. Backhand index pointing right. Share this story so the message spreads. Because kindness deserves witnesses. And silence deserves defenders.